Evolutionists proudly accuse creationists of being unscientific. They act as if they own a monopoly on reality. It should trouble them deeply, then, to learn that some of the greatest scientists of all time were creationists. Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, Roger Bacon, Galileo Galilei, Gregor Mendel, and Louis Pasteur all believed in creationism. Without these great minds, modern science would be held back centuries. Such a lack of appreciation for the pioneers that came before. I just had to investigate. Creationists are the Rodney Dangerfields of science. They get no respect at all. In the 13th century, Roger Bacon, a creationist and monk, redefined our understanding of optics. It was his concepts which later led to the invention of eyeglasses. Johannes Kepler was a creationist. Under the tutelage of Tycho Brahe, he was able to make extremely accurate observations of the movements of the planets, comets, and other astronomical bodies. He published his laws of planetary motion between 1607 and 1615 in his works Astronomia Nova, Harmonices Mundi, and the Epitome of Copernican Astronomy. In the mid-1600s, creationist Galileo Galilei furthered the ideas of Copernicus, determining that the sun was the center of our solar system. He was such a martyr for science that his finest and greatest work, Two New Sciences, was published while he was under a lifetime sentence of house arrest. Isaac Newton was a creationist, yet his work dispelled any doubts that the Earth orbits the sun. He discovered the laws of motion and gravitation based on the work of Johannes Kepler. He created an entire field of study called calculus, and then he turned 25. His masterpiece of these concepts was his 1687 work, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. In the mid-1800s, a creationist friar named Gregor Mendel began a discipline that would eventually be called genetics. He noticed that traits in organisms, specifically wrinkles and colors in pea plants, were the result of dominant and recessive properties. His work was published in 1866, but would not be recognized until over 3 decades later, when it was independently rediscovered by Erich von Zermatt, Hugo de Vries, Karl Correns, and William Jasper Spillman. At the same time Gregor Mendel was conducting his experiments, another creationist, Louis Pasteur, was conducting some of his own. Pasteur was incredibly instrumental in continuing the development of the germ theory of disease. This led to pasteurization, which provided safer drinking conditions. Although he wasn't the first to understand fermentation, he was the first to show that yeast was a living organism. The most damaging detail of his work for evolution, however, was his experiment with spontaneous generation. He showed that life does not spontaneously spring forth from non-living material. Maggots do not simply appear in rotten meat. Sterilized chicken broth does not simply rearrange itself into bacteria. The visible life we see in each case is due to contamination. He then proposed that life comes from life. He called this concept Biogenesis. All of these great scientists were devout Christians. The only problem is, none of their accomplishments were derived from creationism. In fact, not all of them were even creationists. Roger Bacon may or may not have been a creationist, but there's not one single concept of optics that would be predicted by assuming a 6-day creation event. In fact, the church considered him a heretic for suggesting that white light can be refracted into rainbow colors by anything other than the divine hand of God. Johannes Kepler might or might not have been a creationist, but nowhere in any of his works does he make one single scientific prediction based on a 6-day creation 6,000 years ago. Galileo Galilei was certainly a Christian, but whether or not he was a young earth creationist is uncertain. The fact remains that his heliocentric model of the universe was seen as heretical by the creationist church of the time. That's the reason he died under house arrest in the first place. Isaac Newton was almost certainly a creationist. It could actually be argued that his work has had more of an effect on the world than any other person, including Jesus himself. Nowhere, however, in Principia Mathematica does he base any physical law or concept on the assumption of a recent 6-day creation. Most of his writings actually focused more on alchemy than physics. Gregor Mendel was probably a creationist, but again, none of his laws of inheritance make any reference to a young Earth. Even Louis Pasteur developed his ideas on biogenesis to openly refute the supernatural idea that a rat or maggot could simply appear fully formed formed from non-living material. In the end, there is no reason that creationists can't be considered scientific. They most certainly can be scientific. The real claim is that creationism itself is unscientific. The test for that would be to actually read the brilliant works by all of these scientists. You will notice that a creationist belief played no part in predicting any of their accomplishments. A common creationist argument is that evolution is only a theory. One of the main aspects of a theory is its ability to predict evidence and make the assertion that if its predictions are wrong, the theory is wrong. At present, creation makes no such predictions and takes no such chances with its validity. For example, when seeing genetic and morphological similarity, a creationist will claim that such similarities would be predicted by a common designer. The reality is that creationism merely accommodates such similarities. It would be completely unaffected if no such similarities existed. This is why it is often called unfalsifiable. This is why it cannot lead to future discoveries. This is why it isn't even worthy of being called a theory. It is nothing more than a proposition. In and of itself, it is another example of how creationism taught me real science. Learn more about the real science behind other creationist arguments by watching other episodes. If there's a creationist argument you think I should investigate, please comment below. It may be the subject of a later video. In the meantime, subscribe and make sure you don't miss it.